Honest to God, I'm leaving the country.
Predator! Predator! Dun, 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 dun. I mean,
most of what is said about Vladimir Putin in the mainstream press is just factually not true.
America deserved 9/11, dude. Fuck it. I'm saying it.
Every day, you open your phone. You see the news, you see the posts, you see the outrage. And slowly, without really noticing, you start to build a picture. A picture of what the other side looks like, what they believe, who they are. And I want to ask you something. Where did this picture come from? Because here's the thing. You probably didn't build it from conversation with real people. You didn't build it from your neighbor, your coworker, the guy in the line at the coffee shop. You built it from what you were shown. And what you were shown was chosen very deliberately by systems that don't care whether it's accurate. They care whether it keeps you watching. Let's talk about political polarization. Now, I know that phrase sounds like something out of a political science lecture. Bear with me, because this isn't really about politics. It's about what you think you know about other people. Researcher actually splits polarization into two types, and understanding the difference matters. The first type is ideological polarization, where people genuinely hold different policy positions. We disagree on tax policy, immigration, healthcare, that kind of thing. The second type is affective polarization. That's the technical term for we don't just disagree, we hate each other. We think the other side is stupid, dangerous, or morally corrupt. And here's what the research is finding. Affective polarization, the hatred, has been growing faster than the actual ideological disagreement, which means the problem isn't really that we disagree on policy. The problem is that we've started to see each other as enemies, as threats. How does this happen when the actual policy gap hasn't grown nearly as fast? That's the question.
What happened is the radical left and their
officers tried to push back, firing pepper bullets into the agitated crowd.
Part of the answer is the media. Not because the media is evil, not because there's some shadowy meeting where they decide to make everyone hate each other, but because of how it's built, because of what it's optimized for. Here's the key idea. Media doesn't just reflect the world. It selects, it frames, it decides who gets microphones and who doesn't. It decides which voices are treated as representing everyone and which voices disappear. And when you start to understand the incentives driving those decisions, it starts to make a lot of uncomfortable sense. Here's how the machine works. Platforms like TikTok, YouTube, Instagram, and Twitter, and your nightly news broadcasts make money when you pay attention. That's the deal. You give them attention, they sell that attention to advertisers. Simple enough. But here's the problem. Not all attention is equal. And after years of testing, these platforms have figured something out. The thing that keeps your attention better than anything else isn't information. It isn't nuance. It isn't careful, balanced coverage of complex issues. It's anger. Anger keeps you scrolling. Outrage keeps you clicking. Fear keeps you watching. Not because you're weak, because that's how human psychology works. We've evolved to pay attention to threats, and these systems have gotten very, very good at triggering that wiring. So the question a platform asks isn't, is this true, or is this fair? It asks, will this make someone click? And then it shows you more of whatever made you click last time. This creates something researchers call extremity bias. Think about the full range of people who identify as pick a side, either side. There are millions of them. They hold all kinds of views. Most of them are moderate, internally complicated, and sometimes contradictory. They argue with the other side on some things, but rather talk about other things like their kid's hockey game than argue about policy. Those people are not showing up in your feed. The people showing up in your feed are the ones who generate engagement, the ones who say something outrageous enough to go viral, the ones who frame everything as a fight, the ones who make you feel something, usually something negative. And here's where the damage really kicks in. The more you see those extremity voices, the more your brain starts to assume that's just what other people are like. It's not a continuous decision. It's just a pattern recognition. You see enough of things, it starts to feel representative. Research published in the British Journal of Political Science points to something worth taking a closer look at. When mainstream media repeatedly platforms extreme political figures, even to criticize them, even to debunk them, it normalizes their views. Exposure itself has an effect. There's a concept in psychology called the availability heuristic. Your brain assumes that whatever comes to mind easily must be common. If extreme voices are everywhere, they start to feel like they represent everyone. So if you're watching to be outraged by the extreme guy, you're still watching, and his views are still getting treated as worth engaging with, and your brain is still logging. This is what the other side looks like. The algorithm isn't neutral here. It doesn't just show you what's out there, it shows you what keeps you engaged. So if political content makes you angry, you'll start seeing more of it. And if it keeps working, the feed leans in even harder. Over time, it narrows what you see, step by step. It's not really a feed. It's more like a funnel. And most people don't notice it's happening. Or if they do, they assume it doesn't apply to them, which in a way is part of the problem. I wanted to see if any of this actually showed up in real people's lives. So I sat down with two university students, both in their early 20s, both active on social media, and I just started asking questions. What they watch, how they make sense of what they see, and how that connects to how they think about their own political identity. I'm going to walk you through those moments from those conversations, because each one lines up pretty closely with what the research predicts. My first participant is a political science student. They read the news, they cross-referenced sources, they're genuinely trying to be helpful about all this.
Algorithmically, your algorithm kind of forms to what you spend the most time viewing or liking. So it definitely reflects my beliefs, but I don't take that as word. It's more of a jumping point for curiosity.
On the surface, it sounds like someone who has it all figured out, aware of this algorithm, not taking things at face value. But then I asked a different question. Whether the algorithm ever actually challenged them, whether they ever came across content that pushes back on what they already believed.
It's hard when it's an algorithm and it's just feeding you what you want to see and what you want to hear. So you're not really challenged.
And there it is. The awareness is real, the immunity isn't. Knowing you're in an echo chamber doesn't mean you're outside of it. You can understand the system and still be shaped by it. That's what researchers are pointing to when they talk about algorithmic filtering. Not that people are naive, but that these systems operate beneath conscious awareness. Participant 2 describes something I think is one of the most honest observations I've heard about how social media actually works. We were talking about why certain political creators get an enormous audience, and they said,
The media rewards anger and frustration and emotional discourse. It doesn't reward genuine good discourse.
And they weren't just talking in the abstract. They were describing a specific dynamic they'd watched play out, where creators who had taken extreme positions and use a charged language grow massive platforms, while people making careful, substantive arguments get ignored.
If someone came along and said, hey, we should look at a tax policy, everyone would be like, fucking boring, get out. No one's watching that. But the reason he's doing it is not because he's a stupid guy, it's because he thinks he needs to take radical stances to get attention.
That's a diagnosis of the structural problem, not just a complaint about a specific person. The system rewards the performance of outrage. Politicians know it, content creators know it, news networks know it, and the result is a media environment where the most extremes, the most emotional, the most adversarial voices get amplified, not because that's what most people believe, but because that's what keeps the lights on. This is where things become more complex, because this isn't just about how people view the other side. It's also about whether individuals feel represented or misrepresented when they see their own beliefs reflected in the media. Participant 2 identified as a young conservative. I asked whether they feel people with similar views are portrayed accurately in political media. This is how they responded.
My age group and political leaning, Nick Fuentes is like the face of that, and I hate it. It's so frustrating to have these edgelord guys doing the work of young conservative men. And the left is super happy to be like, look at these young conservative men, which is just not the case with everyone.
Let's sit with that for a moment. This is someone who holds conservative views, is politically engaged, and capable of expressing nuance, yet they feel the version of their identity portrayed in the media barely resembles them. What gets amplified instead is the most extremes, the most provocative, the version most likely to drive engagement. And that carries a real social cost. I asked whether they feel comfortable being open about their political views around people they don't know well.
If people are like, what's your political leaning? I don't think I'd be so quick to say conservative. I'd frame it and sugarcoat it in a way that really specified I'm not like a chronically online racist dude.
That's a person managing their identity in public, adjusting how they present themselves not because their beliefs change, but because the media version of that label is so distorted that claiming it straight feels like claiming something they're not. This is what the research on homogenization is actually pointing to. Moderate voices don't just fail to get amplified, they start to disappear from the conversation, including from how people are willing to talk about themselves. The last thing I wanted to show you may be the most unsettling. By the end of my conversation with participant 2, we had covered algorithms, media incentives, and political identity. I had asked what concerned them most about the future of political media. They described how after the October 7th attacks, they found it difficult to trust any image or claim from either side. They pointed to how a single local incident involving a trans individual was amplified into a broader narrative about trans people as a threat to children, and they spoke about AI-generated content flooding every platform. Then they said this.
Nothing will be true and everything will be true. And that will just ruin any ability to have a grasp of what's going on in the world around you.
That's not skepticism, it's exhaustion. It's what happens when the information environment becomes so saturated that your brain stops asking what's true and starts asking who do I trust? And increasingly, the answer is no one. Participant 1 described a different response to the same problem. They had built a kind of system cross-referencing multiple sources, treating social media as a starting point rather than a conclusion. For them, credibility came down to this.
Matches with the general narrative of what the other sources are saying as well.
Which sounds reasonable until you realize that the general narrative of mainstream sources is shaped by the very same framing effects and incentive structures we've been discussing. Consensus does not equal accuracy. It often just means many people are operating within the same system. So let's put this together. The algorithm amplifies extreme content because extreme content generates engagement. Media platforms give the most extreme voices the most coverage because it drives traffic. Your brain sees those extreme voices enough times that it starts to assume they're representative. What does that leave? A picture of the other side that's monolithic, ununified, like they all believe the same thing, want the same thing, feel the same things, like they're a team with a clear ideology and no internal disagreement, which is almost never true. Research shows that people tend to see outgroups as more uniform than they actually are, a phenomenon known as outgroup homogeneity. We see our own group as complex, varied, and even contradictory, but the other group, it starts to look all the same. The media amplifies this. When the most visible voices from any political group are also the loudest and most extreme, the result isn't just a distorted image, it's the erasure of eternal diversity. The moderates, the uncertainty, the people you might actually agree with on some things, they don't disappear because they don't exist. They do. They disappear because the system has no incentive to show them. And this isn't just an abstract problem. There are real costs. When you start to see the other side as a monolith of extremists, you stop looking for common ground because you assume it doesn't exist. Conversation shuts down before they even begin. Disagreement stops being a difference of opinion and starts feeling like a moral threat. Effective polarization stops being about ideology and becomes about identity. It turns into a question of teams. Which side are you on, and how dangerous is the other? And that perception that the other side is a unified, dangerous enemy isn't built through real conversation. It's built through what gets amplified, what gets erased, and what you're fed hour after hour on a screen. And here's what stayed with me. The two people I spoke to came from the same social circle, same age, same city, same general media environment, and yet they saw things differently. One felt media actively reshaped how they viewed people with opposing beliefs. The other resisted that, believing that their own thinking was less affected. That difference, that variation within the same small circle, is the point. Real people are complex. They disagree even within the same side. They hold contradictions, they shift, sometimes they change their minds. But the feed doesn't show you that. The feed shows you a type. I'm not going to tell you to delete your apps. I'm not going to say that media is all propaganda, or that everyone you disagree with is secretly reasonable, or that the answer is some kind of both sides compromise. What I will say is this. These systems weren't built to inform you. They were built to keep you engaged. And in doing that, they've made it harder to see people on the other side as complex, varied, or internally divided, because that kind of complexity doesn't perform well. The people on your feed aren't the people. They're the ones most likely to capture your attention. The extreme voice is real. It's not just representative. And the system has every incentive to make you forget that. So the next time you feel like you know exactly what those people believe, ask yourself, where did that picture come from? Because there's a decent chance it didn't come from those people. It came from a system that profits from your certainty. Thank you.